It takes a lot of help to finish these. Mark the spot with a sign painted red. Take 2 shares as a fair profit. The fur of cats goes by many names. North winds bring colds and fevers. He asks no person to vouch for him. Go now and come here later. A sash of gold silk will trim her dress. Soap can wash most dirt away. That move means the game is over. Welcome back to the Passing Through podcast. I'm still here in southern Portugal. The sounds you're hearing in the background are the songs of happy birds who are seeing blue skies after a week of rain. It won't last. There's more rain on the horizon, but they're grateful for these short moments of sunshine. We can learn lessons from birds if we're listening. You'll also hear the sound of a rooster who, because of his incessant early morning screeching and squawking, has been placed on death row and is to be butchered in the coming days. There are lessons to be learned from him, too. The squeaky wheel only sometimes gets the grease. Other times it gets a sharp knife. Another sound that you may pick out, if you're listening carefully, is whatever sort of Mack truck just pulled up to the side of the van as I'm recording this podcast, which is interesting because up until this point, up until when I brought out the microphone, it was completely quiet on this street. There were no cars passing, there were no sounds, just the ambient sounds that you would be hearing in the background. But naturally, as soon as I press record, a parade of cars have appeared. In the distance, you'll probably also hear the dim sound of racing motorcycles, which creates a strange and interesting sonic ambience up here in the Green Mountains. And that's because there's some kind of autodrome, I think that's what it's called, where people go and race motorcycles. I won't spend too much time on personal musings or discussing what kind of sounds and happenings are going on outside the van, because I want to get us moving into the episode and into the conversation with our lovely guest, Brynna Campbell. Brynna is a musician, a songwriter, an animator, a naturalist, and a community builder. I've been moving in some of the same online circles as her, and I've been wanting to chat with her for some time now, so I'm glad we were finally able to make it happen. It was a pleasure to speak with her, and we spoke with a variety of things. We kind of danced all over the map on this one. We started with the LA fires. We spoke a bit about the California Naturalist program. We addressed some pernicious myths propped up by modernity, like humans being a destructive or invasive species on this planet, for example. We talk about how religion influences our narratives about the natural world, and we talk about music and trauma and emotional presence and how difficult it can be to be present with painful or challenging emotions. So as you can tell, we covered a lot of ground in this conversation. But nearing the end of our conversation, in my haste, I committed the cardinal sin of podcasting, where I didn't give the guest a chance to speak about where listeners can find her. This was because I was in an unfamiliar space. I didn't have any battery power on my phone or my computer. Wow, there is a car just grabbing a clown horn. Repeat it. Can you hear that? There must be a sign outside of my van. Someone's recording a podcast inside. Make noise. And so everyone who's driving by is just doing what they can to make an appearance in this episode. So I'm just going to have to start celebrating the diversity of sounds that you're hearing in this episode this morning, this quiet Saturday morning. But back to the topic. I was in my van in a torrential rainstorm, parked under an awning in a supermarket parking lot so that I could shelter the car from the sound of tapping rain. The day before, the solar went down at the place that we're staying at, so we had no power to charge our devices. Luckily, I had enough power to make it through the conversation, but nearing the end, I noticed that the battery was dangerously close to dying. I only had 2% battery, and so I made a colossal blunder. It was an embarrassing, epic faux pas, and I apologize with all of my soul and body and wish to repent. So now, dear listeners, I will tell you where you can find Brynna. You can find her at brynnacampbell.com. You can find her on Spotify. You can find her on YouTube or Instagram. All of the links that you'll need to find Brynna can be found in the show notes. So I hope you enjoy this episode. In the interest of time, and also in the interest of who knows what other sounds will make their way into this podcast if I continue talking, I'm going to skip the eco tip since the whole thing is basically an eco tip. So be good to one another, and I'll talk to you next time. Hello, Brynna, and welcome to the Passing Through podcast.
Hi, thanks for having me.
Yeah, it's great to have a chance to chat with you. I have kind of been admiring you from afar for a while. We kind of cross paths and like ships in the night, and I always wanted to speak to you because it seems like we have a lot of shared interests and sensibilities. So it's a pleasure to actually finally get the chance to speak to you.
Yeah, it's good to talk to you too. Yeah, I think you kind of it's interesting to have what's effectively an internet pen pal because you don't ever know what their vibe is until you're actually talking in an audio or video format.
Yeah. And to give us like a sense of space, like a sense of place even, to start our conversation and see where things go. You're based in LA.
hmm
So how have the fires affected you?
Yeah, it's been a strange couple weeks. It's interesting. I'm a person who is obsessed with native plants and ecosystems, so this is something I've been kind of prepping for the last decade. I got my California Naturalist certification, which is a program we have out here where they basically take you to a local wild space and will kind of teach you about the local ecology and, name plants and animals and show you how, which types of plant grow on which slope of the mountain. And you kind of just learn about these macro forces. And one of those things, it's a beautiful program, but one of the things you kind of go through is this grieving process because you start seeing how much destruction we've caused with our environment, where how many of these plants are invasive, how many of these plants last for a month and then they die and become kindling. So it's definitely something that these fires have been something I've been prepping for. And one of the nice things is that when you're as involved with native plants as I am, you've done a lot of the legwork already. So most of my plants at my home are fire resistant. Most of them have this underground mycelial network that even if the top burns, they've got this fantastic root system and network, and they share nutrients with each other, and they are good at recovering quickly from fire. And I think it's been stressful, obviously, waiting for statistics on how close is the fire. My closest fire was a couple miles from where I am. I'm in a relatively secure part of the San Fernando Valley, which is kind of flanked by two freeways, which is kind of where firefighters make their stands. So I was relatively in a relatively safe place, but I've had a lot of friends evacuate. It's been kind of a wake up call for a lot of people, I think, as far as climate change goes, because I think people get caught up in in the intellectual discussion of it, but having a physical event happen has really pushed people into mutual aid spaces, which has been great. Seeing people do the physical work that they've been talking about doing for years. So it's interesting. It almost feels like a kind of practice run for what the next 4 years is going to be like.
I like the dark symbolism there. Yeah.
Yeah.
Hmm. And there's so much there that you said that I actually am very curious about it, and things that are reflecting back at me, because here in Portugal, one of the first things that we did at the place that I'm at now is that we had to create a 50-meter perimeter around the property, because it's mandated by law here that you have to make sure you're clearing the land, whether that's by putting chickens in or other grazing animals to go in there and just tear things out, or just chopping them down yourself and using them as mulch.
Mm-hmm.
Whatever you're doing, to make sure that you have some kind of barrier between you and the fires that inevitably come.
Mm-hmm.
And similar to you, our host here at this place that we're volunteering, he's made it his passion, his duty to kind of get in there and put in flame resistant plants all around. So he's got cacti, he's got aloe, succulents, all kind of things that are super watery.
Mm-hmm.
And just doing that and being out there and feeling it as a reality, and the kind of grim nature of it, of just like, yeah, because he brought us up to the highest point and he showed us, we looked out across the valley, and he said a few years ago a fire came through and you just saw ruins all around us
Mm-hmm.
in the distance, just old stone houses burned to the ground. And it feels so much more real when you're in the place actually preparing for the fire and you're trying to do what you can to prevent it. So when you're describing doing this on your property and where you are, and partnering with California to learn how to do these things, that's great that there are these initiatives where people can go. And is it like volunteer work, or is it actually like?
So the California Naturalist program itself is a college course. So you can go through any University of California and they'll have their own personalized version of it. And then I also do a lot of volunteer work through there's a place called Friends of the Sepulveda Basin, which is like they go out every week and clear invasive grasses. It's just there are a few programs. There are not as many as I would like to see. I think there's kind of this pushback against doing what I would call indigenous practices gardening, because it doesn't look as aesthetically beautiful as the traditional English garden that most people want, especially in Hollywood. Hollywood is very much steeped in influencer culture and in everything being stunning all the time. So, and that includes people's yards and personal spaces. And so there is a lot of, massive overwatering of these annual plants that don't last. And the second the water gets taken from them, they just become tinder. So it is interesting. There are some cool programs. I've been trying to explore more indigenous spaces lately. I
Mm-hmm.
went to there's a place in LA called the Chapter House. It's an indigenous community center where they just meet up and have things. They had a fun comedy show there the other night and had a donation drive for the fire victims. And there's just a huge cultural difference between this kind of Western culture that dominates LA and the indigenous culture, which is a lot more about, we might not understand this ecosystem, but we're going to honor it and allow it to keep going because this is the system that actually has allowed us to survive in this area. John Muir is like a big explorer in California, and his whole thing was that there's this pristine wilderness to it. And the truth is, it's a lie. Because the indigenous people heavily managed all of our wilderness.
Yes.
So we actually are an intrinsic part of this ecosystem. We're not an invasive species. That's a thing that I think stops people from really engaging with the ecosystem, is this feeling of guilt that, oh, well, we're invaders, so we're not going to be good for this land no matter what. And the truth is, if we actually start adopting these indigenous practices, we aren't an invasive species and we can thrive here alongside the ecosystem. But it is going to require kind of a mental shift in what that looks like.
Yes. Yeah. This is beautifully said. This is something that I firmly believe and has been reinforced lately. I'm reading Braiding Sweetgrass, and it's so much about this. It seems to be at the heart of the book so far, is this sense of reciprocity in the collaborative, relational aspect of being a part of nature instead of apart from nature. So
Mm-hmm.
yeah, I'm really happy that you're saying that, because I think there is this myth. There's this dangerous myth that's become, there's a phrase that I like a poisonous banality,
Mm-hmm.
where it's just, people always say, yeah, we're just a scourge. We're just a blight on this planet. We just destroy it like a virus. But that's not true. That can be true depending on how we behave and the stories we tell ourselves. But if we shift the frame and we shift the narrative, we have a planet of billions of assets that can help nurture, sustain, and steward the earth.
Mm-hmm. There's probably something in there about the kind of religiousness of the original sin, being a thing where people are comfortable in that. Well, if we're fundamentally evil, then we don't have a responsibility to do better in a way
Mm.
where it's kind of steeped in that feeling of if we are sinful, if we're a virus, if we're evil, if we're putting evil on things, then we should just back away if we want to be good and disconnect if we want to be good. And that's not a healthy way to engage with everything. I think if you can let go of that guilt and let go of that feeling that we're always doing evil, which, with under our current system, we definitely are doing some very bad things. Um, if we can let go of some of that and go like, let's change what we can in this system, or maybe try to dismantle this system where in the little tiny ways that we can dismantle it, then maybe we're better off than I see a lot of my friends who are kind of in this fight or flight or freeze mode right now, where they're really worried about the state of the country. They're really panicked about it, but they're not engaging in this positive behavior. They're just kind of stuck in the past, going, how do we pick apart what just happened instead of going, how do we move forward?
Hmm. Yeah, absolutely. And that's something that we could talk about next, I guess. But there was something I wanted to go back to when you spoke about religion as kind of planting some kind of seed here. I think that's really interesting and true. But there's another dimension of that to me I always think about, which is when we took our belief structure and our belief system and moved from God is in the trees, God is in the river, God is in the on the breeze, to God is now in some alternate dimension that is inaccessible to us, and we can go there when we die for eternity and live in paradise, but we have to condemn and see everything material and sensual as sinful. And
Hmm.
this really, I think, is one of the most awful things about monotheistic religions, I guess, in the Abrahamic tradition, where we forsake the earth for eternal paradise. And
Hmm.
yeah, that aspect of religion always kind of gets me, because I don't hear people speak about it as much, but it's kind of fundamental to the religion that everything that's material and natural is sinful, tempting,
Hmm.
dangerous, and you need to forsake it.
Mhm. And it's interesting how it affect most of my community they're not religious people. Most of my community are comedians and musicians and people who do want to exist in that kind of realm of being of the earth, but it's still I see the influence of that things are bad for now, let's hunker down and wait until they're good. You're
Hmm.
waiting for heaven and that was something that struck me about going to the chapter house, the Indigenous Community Center the other day, is just that um, they're making things good now for themselves. One of the community leaders there, Jana Schmeeding, she's a very funny comedian, actress, writer. She was on the TV show Rutherford Falls, if you've ever seen that. But her thing for the night was I'm a comedian. It's my job to keep the good vibes going. It's important to keep the good vibes going. And that sounds so silly to a lot of people, but it's true because if you can't keep the good vibes going, then all those people who are in activist spaces don't get a break from their activism. They end up running on fumes. So all of these little seemingly unimportant things like, oh, it is important to make people happy. It's really important to keep people going and feeding them, whether that's emotionally or literally. It's all of these little tiny things that don't seem important because we're all focused on this global stuff. Those are the things that are actually going to keep us alive.
And speaking of that global stuff that you alluded to earlier, was it yesterday that Trump's inauguration happened
Yes.
on Martin Luther
Yeah.
King Day?
Uh-huh.
Weird juxtaposition of days.
Yeah. Yeah. Not ideal. Not ideal. Um, yeah, it's that's been kind of all rolled up into everything that's been happening. I think the fires have been the main thing on people's minds, but of course we find time to stress about other large things. It's not a great vibe, but I think I might be not suffering as much as other people, but I think the way that I've combated those feelings about where our country is at is doing boots on the ground work. Um, I think that the thing that I've noticed, the pattern I've noticed is that the more online people are, the more despair there is. And the more that we go out in person and talk to other people in real life, they're even if the people you meet out on the street are weird or boring or maybe they bother you a little bit, it's kind of exposure therapy to go out and say like, "Oh, this is what this is. Other people are not monsters. They're not shadow figures. They're fine. Like we're okay. We're okay right now." And obviously, who knows what's going to happen over the next 4 years? And but uh, there's no real purpose to panicking about it right now. The best thing we can do is do the same thing that I've been doing with native plants with the fires is I'm going to start planting these little seeds, start building community, I run a little music open mic at a tiny theater out here. I'm going to keep doing that music open mic. That's going to be a safe space for everybody to express their feelings. Um,
I actually wanted to talk to you about that, so I'm super happy you just went there
mhm,
and you even
mhm.
used the phrase that I wanted to use, community building. So yeah, you're doing exactly that, and I'm really curious about how that's been for you and what you're seeing there and how it is because yeah, it sounds amazing.
It's fun. It's much like gardening. It's slower than you want it to be.
Mm.
So there is that, but it's good. It's just about you can really build community just about anywhere if you just start showing up somewhere. This theater, it's called the Lyric Hyperion. It's a little theater in Silver Lake, and it's it kind of became one of my go-to places to go see little tiny comedy shows post-pandemic because I realized during lockdown that there was going to be a need for me to kind of re-expose myself to people, after not having seen strangers for months. So that was kind of my little segue into becoming more social. And then once I got there, I started doing music open mics around town and kind of noticed that music open mics, they've become very lonely and kind of solipsistic and
Mm.
cubicled off, where people will show up to play their song and then they'll just leave, or they'll be on their phones when other people are playing, or it's just an anxious vibe, and you can see that all the way to the top of the music industry where we don't really have bands making it anymore. We have mostly single solo artists. So everybody's kind of walled off from each other, and I saw the need to kind of emotionally unionize because if we don't We have a
That's a nice
union, but it's
term. I
not very
like that.
good. Yeah. But yeah, because we're not in competition with each other. And honestly, the industry is they're just cultivating their own people anyway. So if you want to make it in the music industry, you're going to have to be kind of on your own. So the thought that, hey, we're not in competition with each other, we should be building this community where we support each other. I thought it would be a good idea to do it at a black box theater because most of those open mics are at bars and restaurants and there's a million distractions going on. And a black box theater, you're kind of you're kind of trapped, but in a good way. You have to pay attention to other people. It's really noticeable if you're in a theater and someone's on their phone or someone's chatting. Um, so I started doing this open mic, and it's been a really great experience. It is just for me about modeling being intensely supportive, because every musician who tries something on stage, even if they aren't technically proficient or if they're not, if their stage presence isn't amazing, it's there's something good about them and there's something supportive and that you can do. And there's something intensely vulnerable and incredible about someone going on stage and singing music that they wrote.
Yes.
And so it's for me it's easy to kind of embody that support because they're doing something amazing that other people are not brave enough to do. So I just yeah, I wanted to cultivate this super supportive space. We started kind of expanding what we're doing at the theater. We have a Spotify playlist that we put everybody on. We have, even though Spotify's evil, but that's a whole other uh, that's a whole other tangent. Um, it's more about making people feel like this isn't just a place where you go up and pour your heart out to no one and then leave. It's a place for forming connections with people that are real and forming bands and like and going, oh, this person plays guitar and I play piano. Oh, we could actually team up, and there's no rule that says we can't do that. Even though there just feels like there's a pressure there. Um, but that's all capitalism because they all want us to be alone. The more segregated they are, the more they can exploit us. So
Mm-hmm.
yeah, but it's been really nice. We did a donation drive on Friday for fire victims.
Ah, nice.
Yeah, a lot of people showed up. We had some neighbors come by and go, "Oh, I'm going to start knocking on doors and just asking for toiletries." And they just went around and did that, and it was just a nice. And we got to give some direct donations as well. That was an interesting thing because we were planning on just taking these boxes of donations to this center at the end of the day. But a couple people who were unhoused came by and they just needed things. And it was nice to just, it took a second because we're so used to doing these middleman kind of things where we're like, oh no, this goes to the donation center. But if there's a person right in front of you who needs a toothbrush, then give them a toothbrush. Um, so it's been really interesting.
Yeah, that sounds incredible. Using this community building space where you're creating a collaborative space that's nurturing and supportive to actually funnel mutual aid and solidarity in the aftermath of a crisis. That's that's exactly the kind of thing that people like I love to see because it gives me hope. It's very inspiring where I see that and I go, wow, there are people that can make a difference just, tending to the part of the garden that you can touch. That's where you are.
Hmm.
That's what you can do. You can marshal some resources, get some people together, do it. That's
Yeah.
that's great to hear.
Yeah, it's been nice. It's been a good space. And it's you start attracting other people who are helpers when you model that kind of helpful behavior. It just is, you live the things that you want to see, and it kind of weeds out the people who are trying to take advantage and puts people in who are equally supportive. So that's kind
Hmm.
of been the whole vibe of that place in general. And we have an amazing artistic director as well. He's also on board for this kind of stuff. Yeah. So it's just been a really nice collaborative experience.
Hmm. Yeah, that reminds me of there's a place here in this little nearby town that I'm in a nearby town right now because the other one I thought would be too loud, and now I'm in a place that's maybe arguably louder. But anyway, the place that I was initially in, they have a kind of new cultural center. It's for Portuguese people, but also the audience is fairly international. And they'll have, like, tonight they have movies there for kids, so people go with their families, they watch a movie, they hang out. They have a cafe with organic produce, locally sourced. They have local beers, and they support local artists. So it's like every night of the week something is happening there, and the space itself is really cool and inviting, and there's outlets all over the place for people to plug in and charge and just be in the space. And I was thinking, wow, just setting up something like this where you're creating an encouraging space for people to just come out and be together, and kind of like you're creating a public good. It's like a commons area.
Mhm.
And it's funny, when we were there, we saw one of the live shows, speaking of artists and what the music industry is trying to promote and all of this. There was an artist that came through, and she was just incredible. It was the kind of music that, you're it's never going to make it, I guess you could say. And that's the bad part about it, is that now when I can see an artist I just wanted to interject here for a moment, using the powers of the medium here, since while I was going back and listening to this episode to edit and polish and clean the audio for you, I noticed that I didn't like the way that I came across here, because I didn't really complete my thought. I did a thing here that I often do, where I start a topic, get excited by something else, put the initial topic down, and then forget to return to it. So I wanted to close the loop here to explain what I was talking about the artist, when I said that it's not the kind of music that will make it. It sounded like I was saying that the artist didn't have the skill or capability to make it in the music industry, which is not what my intention was. My intention was to communicate that this artist had so much passion, so much skill, so much heart, that she was able to breathe life into a space and give people the energy to dance with joy, vitality, vigor, rhythm, and groove all night long. And that this was truly music. It was soulful. It was beautiful. She was incredible. And to me, she was doing what she wanted to do. She was playing music for people and electrifying a room. She was, in my opinion, a true artist. And what I wanted to say here was that that's the thing that I dislike about music these days, is when I see an artist who has this quality. I realize that the music industry doesn't court this quality. They're not so much interested in this kind of authenticity as much as they are in a hollow pop sound that can bring in profit. So this is kind of what I meant here. And I just wanted to chime in and clarify for a minute or two so that I can correct any possible wrong impression here. Now, when I can see an artist whose passion is there, who's putting their heart into something, who is just singing their song up on stage, like you said, taking that risk, being vulnerable, the courage and the connective force, like that whole crowd in this place was going wild, dancing, staying up all night for some like no name band, but she was incredible. She was an artist. She was great. So yeah, creating these spaces where people can just be together and share something as deeply ancestral as music and be in that place together, I think is like, that's where magic happens. That's the,
Mm-hmm.
I feel like those are the
Yeah.
places where all the revolutionaries always organize inevitably to try to like
Mm-hmm.
topple the system. So
Yeah. Yeah. It's interesting because the more I do music, the more I think of it as a non-chemical psychedelic, because
yes.
it does open people up emotionally in a way that not much else does. And I structure my music for trauma processing because that's my goal, is to create a healing experience for people. And it's specifically for people who aren't going to take a psychedelic, because as much as, as much as it would be nice for everybody to, take mushrooms and then everybody's happy and connected and feeling connected, a lot of people are never going to do that. But a lot of people are going to go to a concert. People will go to I've I think about this a lot, of they'll go to a Taylor Swift concert and they'll cry their eyes out, and they'll feel this this beautiful emotional connection. And I can only imagine what it would be like if one of those artists would deliberately create a healing experience and deliberately go, we're going to process these specific emotions and we're going to leave people in a place better than when we found them, and create this kind of perfect, set and setting to process things. Because if we can process things properly, then we can dismantle the bad stuff that our system is doing. And I think that's a sad part of the music industry, is that capitalism has co-opted this stuff, has co-opted music. They'll do this emotional processing stuff, and then they'll put an ad at the end of it,
Hmm.
where it's like, oh, well, you really love, thinking about how you don't fit in right now. And if you want to fit in, here's this thing you can buy as you're on your way out of the concert. Buy a purse or a t-shirt, or that becomes the thing. Or spend $700 on a ticket to go see
Yeah.
some music, and it becomes corrupted in that way. And to me, music, if you correctly do this kind of emotional processing music, it leaves people in a quiet headspace where they can then go home and go, huh, I actually don't need all this stuff. I actually just need to think about my life for a little bit. And capitalism does not like that. They very much
Mm.
don't like that. They don't want you to ever be slowing down or stopping. They want to keep you in this kind of anxious or angry space, because that's when you're dysregulated, you're looking for solutions, and then they'll supply you with a solution that costs money.
That's why I really love my commemorative souvenir from my Taylor Swift concert. It's a pink tank top with her face on it, and when I'm scared at night, I clutch it. But but no, everything that you're saying is true. It's like
Yeah. And I
uh,
buy stuff too. I'm buying stuff all the time. Yeah, but yeah, it is a problem.
and I wonder, like, what you're saying about the healing aspect of music and people going back or going home in a state of greater emptiness than they were in before, but emptiness in a good sense of the word, where they've let
Hmm.
something out, they've let go of something, they have more space inside of themselves to process, to be in relationship to others or to nature. Good art, I think, is able to produce this effect, even in circumstances where it doesn't need to be explicitly healing. Like maybe the
Hmm.
intention isn't explicitly healing, but you have a bunch of people coming together to sing and dance, and they just really let loose and let the demons out. And after,
Hmm.
everyone's just like coated in a glistening sweat, and they're just hanging out, sitting down, saying, "Wow, like that was amazing." Like I've
Hmm.
had experiences like that before where mm, I mean, there it was a non-chemical psychedelic, but also there were some chemical psychedelics included in some of those experiences. But
Hmm.
some of them were completely sober, and they were like transcendent, almost like religious reverie. You can get into these states with music, and it's medicinal.
Hmm. Yeah, it is one of those things that's still so almost too complex for science to pick apart and understand. And I love science, and I love picking things apart, and it's one of those things that I just have to kind of go, well, I'm never going to fully understand how this works. When I'm writing music, it's kind of almost going into a dissociative state where I'm uh, acknowledging that some kind of note or sequence of words or something is having an effect on my emotions, and just pushing that button and seeing how that works and picking that apart. But there's also a level of it that I fully know that I don't understand what I'm doing.
Mm.
you know like I can see it's doing something, so I'm going to keep doing it.
Yeah, you're at the mercy of the muse.
Yeah, yeah. Which doesn't go well with capitalism, because you never know when your muse is going to be there. So if you're constantly churning out content, maybe some people's muses work that way, but that's not the way mine does. So
Yeah, Me either.
It's kind of a, oh, I had this. If I had a visceral experience, I will start writing. If I have some kind of insane emotional thing that I go, ooh, what happened there? Why was I so scared in this moment? Let's pick that apart. That's when my muse starts working.
Hmm.
So it's definitely not suited to our current algorithms.
No, no, not at all. In fact, it seems like it's antithetical. Like all that stuff is so organic. Like as you're speaking, it's something is stirring in me. A certain muse is coming right now. I think that I never made this connection. There's something about music and the creative process that is animistic. Like I've been leaning into animism a lot lately, but usually in the sense of nature and interconnectedness. But the actual like process of creativity is a kind of like you are invoking a spirit. You are inviting something into your space to use you as a conduit almost. You become an outlet for something. Like you said, you go into a disassociative state, and now words are flowing from you, music, your fingers are dancing on a fretboard, whatever's happening. It's almost like possession. And
Hmm.
from an animistic sense, that you can't put that on tap. You can't bottle that up and just say, okay, yeah, this is the cadence by which you have to release things. You have to have an album once a year. Some bands were prolific like that. When you go back to like the 70s and you look at like, I don't know, Pink Floyd or Led Zeppelin or all these guys, the Beatles, people are just churning out albums. But that was probably also a chemically induced, uh, there was a lot of chemical and non-chemical psychedelics going on at that time.
Hmm. Yeah, it is interesting. I am curious, because I've as much as I'm a proponent of psychedelics, I've never done them myself. I just haven't found a strong yes to do them. So I am curious what my music sounds like if someone's on psychedelics, because I because to me, like, part of this is my own thing about writing music is I want to do it on nothing. I want to do it completely sober because I want to maximize the potential that it's affecting someone in the most visceral way I can think of. Because I think if you're supplementing music with a psychedelic, then music doesn't have to do as much of the legwork, because you're kind of just combining those things where, like, you're going, oh yeah, you'll take one dose of music and one dose of mushrooms, and those together will make this beautiful thing happen. But if you're only doing music, it's got to be stronger. um it has to be more visceral because it's the only thing that you're taking. So I'm curious as to what it would be like to listen to my stuff on psychedelics. That's the, like, I mean, probably not for myself because I already kind of know what my whole deal is. I've sat with that album that I put out for like a year, so.
Hmm. Still though, there is something interesting about, I guess, listening to something that you know intimately from a sober headspace and shifting that perspective and just distorting the container to the point where it might sound completely new to you, or you might say, wow, I never saw that this was in there before. Like,
Yeah,
hmm,
lockdown did funny things to my brain. I mean, that's the benefit and terror of sitting with yourself for a year and putting out music in that kind of context, is you learn a lot about yourself, but it's also a, I don't know, deeply repetitive experience. And I am curious as to what being in lockdown has done to everybody's brains, because I know it definitely caused some major changes for me.
hmm. And those changes are, would you say they're still in effect?
Yeah, they definitely are. I definitely got into a space of kind of dissociation, but in a way that was, I wouldn't say it was bad. It's just that I got a lot more introspective and started pulling apart which uh which version of me is intuitively me, and which version of me is one that I've constructed to get by socially, because that
Hmm.
version was not in use for a year, or it was only mildly in use for a whole year. So, because we still have the internet and all of that, but it just isn't the same as being face to face with people. And yeah, it's been interesting. I've definitely retained that kind of. I think it's healthy to kind of look at which version of yourself is the intuitive version and which one is the social construct, because a lot of those social constructs are not good for us. You know, they're I folded back a lot of the stuff that made me uh unalgorithmic, or weird, or um yeah, just or anything that defied this kind of system that we're in. I'm a if you want to go with, the the sort of therapy terms, people see me as a people pleaser, and I am. I don't necessarily think that's inherently bad, but it can cause you to fold back those parts of yourself that are unusual instead of kind of embracing the weird, and I think that's valuable to dismantling our systems.
For me, that's one of the things that in these community building circles that I participate in and sometimes facilitate, that's, I would say half of the process is doing that, where in real time you're seeing what's moving inside of you. It's like you're trying to put yourself at the mercy of the muse, but for what's inside of you, not kind of inviting something in, but inviting something within to reveal itself, like to witness, which
Hmm.
is I think the one of the best ways to know yourself is to try and do that, because it's very hard. It's very unsettling, especially if the thing that reveals itself is like kind of repellent in some way.
Yeah, it is interesting because right now the thing that I've been doing socially is practicing a sense of emotional presence with people, because uh historically I'm a very openly loving, intense person, and that is part of who I am, and most of that gets hidden away socially because people aren't ready for it. I'm a person who um people are people change their mind about me 5 years in, where when they first meet me, they go, "What does she want? What is she trying to get from me? What?" We can call it love bombing or whatever you want to call it, but people think I have an ulterior motive because I fall platonically in love with people very quickly. Um, if I see them do one nice thing for someone, I'm like, "Oh my gosh, you're great." I get excited, and that version of me gets tucked away. And so I've been practicing just trying to let that out a little bit more. And it is sometimes off putting to other people. And that is a thing that I've had to contend with. And I don't like that that's the case. But, and I'll always retreat back into my, oh, it's my chill version of myself. Everything's fine. It's not a big deal. But just trying to give people a little touch of emotional presence sometimes is the thing I'm working on right now. Because I think really a lot of us are kind of locked in this let's just keep things moving uh, kind of place, and we're not stopping to actually be present with each other. And when we do that, it's scary. It is
Mm.
scary. It's scary to be emotionally present because it means that we have to acknowledge all of the trauma that we've all kind of collectively been through. I think there's still a lot of stuff from pandemic that we have not addressed, that we haven't acknowledged how much time or how dissociated we are from each other in person. The social media has basically pushed people out of real spaces. We've all become kind of hyper shy, but we're just kind of running on autopilot, so we don't actually feel that shyness unless we're emotionally present. So it's scary, but it's kind of interesting.
Similar to what you were describing about going on stage and singing your song in front of people, the emotional presence is kind of bearing your heart and your vulnerability to others. And I think a lot of us are accustomed to having that kind of like chewed up or discarded or dropped on the floor. And so we become very nervous doing that and showing our true selves to people because we go, oh, can they handle me? Am I too much?
Mhm.
Maybe I'm kind of a piece of shit and people know it and nobody likes me. Whatever the thoughts
Mhm.
are that we have that we don't verbalize. I have those thoughts sometimes, but to sit with that and share it and show people like, hey, look, these are my wounds. It's very uncomfortable because I think
Mhm.
society, like you were saying, capitalism and consumer culture, they don't really want that. They want you to be happy, consume, distract yourself, pretend everything's good. Because if people started really being authentic to one another and sharing what's really going on and how they're really feeling, they would see that they have all the same doubts, all the same fears, all the same needs. And we go, wow, we're actually much more alike than I thought we were. Like, I have my own shampoo that's the right smell and the right level of conditioning for my dry scalp. But, you have this one, but like, really, I don't know. I think that we are conditioned by this culture to see ourselves as having unique needs. And of course, in some sense, we do. Like, obviously, everyone is an individual. We are all unique things, but mm, so much of that is conditioned.
Mhm. Yeah, there's an interesting thing too with people being afraid to share things with people in an unmonetized way. There's a I fully I think that therapy is very valuable for people, but I also think that that's another thing that's been co-opted where we
Yes.
are so quick to recommend therapy to our friends when they have a problem that it comes from a place of personal discomfort rather than actual help where we have become kind of unwilling to sit with someone else's discomfort or sit with someone else's grief and the truth is, if you actually do sit with someone in their grief, it feels great. You don't
Yes.
have to do anything. You just sit there and listen, and it's nice and it's good because you're doing a good thing just by being there with them and just sitting with them and not judging what they're saying and not, trying to solve the problem because you don't have to solve. There's no problem to solve there. You're just sitting while someone else is sad. And it's a great feeling. I mean, I get the same thing with people being hesitant to volunteer, because then they have to go talk to people and it's scary. And, what if a homeless person comes up? That's the like, it's people are afraid to do that stuff and all of that stuff is the most healing stuff that you can do. I
Mm.
love sitting with people when they're having a bad day because I like I said I don't have to do anything. I just have to listen.
Oh my God, you really need to go to a community building circle. It's like that for 8 hours a day for 3 days. So
Mhm.
it's like so like when you're speaking, I'm like, yes, this is exactly what it's like. It's so healing. It's there's something alchemical about it. It's magical to just be there and not try to fix because we actively caution people against fixing because you when you feel discomfort, you want to fix the person. Say, oh, hey, don't be sad. No, it's okay. That happens to me too. Like it's okay.
Mhm.
Don't worry. And the
Yeah.
person usually doesn't want that. The person usually just wants to be heard and just be like, hey, can you just hold my sadness with me for a few minutes?
Mhm.
So yeah, this
Yeah.
is sagely advice that you're giving here. So thank you for sharing that.
Mhm. Mhm. Yeah, it's so basic, but it is also the reason that we're successful as a species is that intense social um bonding. There's a whole there are, scientific theories about that. There's the thought that we have to take care of our offspring for, so many years before they're ready to go out into the world. That's something that makes us unique as a species. There aren't that many species that do that. Most species are like a couple years and then something's an adult. But we have to have these extremely strong bonds to last that long together, to last for those, let's say 18 years or whatever. We have to have these incredibly strong bonds to be willing to take care of each other for that long. So we have an intense social nature, and that is what makes us successful. That in our diversity, and that's the kind of those are the two things that make us extremely successful as a species. It's not that individualistic behavior, because there are a lot of solitary species. If you want to look at a tiger is solitary largely, unless they're looking for a mate or raising a cub, and they're not doing great. um, and some of that, and a lot of that is our fault. But what makes us so prolific is that bonding. And so the more that we create those emotional connections, the more successful we are together.
More sagely wisdom from you. Thank you. Thank you for sharing that. I was
Sure.
actually somebody this morning, I was having a conversation, the host that I'm staying with, we were talking about a similar kind of parallel thing here about mothers and their children, and
Hmm.
how when a mother has a baby, the baby is growing inside of the mom for 9 months, and it's a part of her. You're literally in the same organism. You start to separate at the end. You have your own thing, but you're still inside the womb of another being. And then when the baby comes out, the baby still, it takes some amount of time for the baby to understand that it and its mother are not the same thing anymore, to differentiate between self and mother. And this to me is a very magical thing, because it speaks to everything that you're just talking about now, how this is like baked into us from literally the process of birthing something. But also it's like it we are always existing in relationship. Like we come from a thing where we are two people as one, and you could even argue three people as one to start to produce this new person. And then you could say actually more than three people, because you have the ancestors of all of those people. And then if you consider like the non-human people, you have all of the water, all of the animals, all of the plants, all of the air, everything that's happened to make this person a person. It's highly relational, and this ability to cooperate and collaborate and be together. And I don't know, it's our superpower. It's what we do
Hmm.
best.
Hmm. Yeah, which is why mutual aid has felt so good in the last couple weeks, because it just is. We are built to do that kind of work. It is. I am curious about. I guess it's white cultures, or maybe it's Eurocentric, or maybe it's the British Empire specifically. But what initially kind of pushed us away from those kind of mutual aid things? Because it's something that always troubles me, is that in a lot of we'll just call it white, we'll say white spaces, in a lot of white spaces, if you are helpful, you get demoted in the hierarchy. And that is such a troubling thing to me, that I've been trying to unpack lately. If you are seen as a helper, um you're either trying to game the system, or, like I said, you're part of this kind of servant class. And I see it happen. I don't see it happen in the indigenous spaces that I visit. I don't see it happen in my neighborhood is 90% minority. So I don't see it in my neighborhood, but I do see it in the spaces I go that are more Eurocentric. This kind of individualistic, if you're helping, you're seen as less than. And
Mm,
I'm so curious about that. And I don't really know what it is. Maybe it is just that we had a servant class generations back, but I mean, we still have servant class, let's be honest. But
mm,
um but it's less overt, I suppose.
yes, it's gone into the
Yeah.
basement.
Hmm. Yeah. Yeah. But it is interesting. It's an interesting thing to observe. It's something that I'm trying to bring the energy of these indigenous spaces back into white spaces,
Yeah,
because it
that's
doesn't feel
interesting.
good. It doesn't feel good to be individualistic. It
No,
just doesn't. It's to no one's benefit.
that's another one of those poisonous banalities where it's a myth. Like there is no such thing as an individual. This myth of the rugged individual who's just gonna conquer everything, and
Yeah.
it's it's bullshit.
Yeah. And it's not benefiting the people who are upholding it either. That's the I mean, maybe some people at the top, but the mass majority of people in those like white spaces, or whatever we want to call them, they're not happy. They're not having a good time. They're just kind of moving through that system on autopilot.
I wonder if it is some relic of colonialism. Like you're saying, maybe it's like you don't want to mm, lump yourself in with the help. There are the servers and those who are served, and know your role kind of thing. It's interesting.
Yeah. But the servers are having a good time. That's the that's the ultimate thing is they're enjoying their life in a way that I don't think people who are just being served are enjoying their life.
Mm.
I mean, they're living longer, which is not, ideal. They're making all the
This,
money and stuff, but
yeah, you could be Elon Musk and you could get those hair transplants and you can get the blood boys and you could
yeah.
get the stem cells and all of the stuff that us poors have access to.
Uh-huh. Uh-huh.
So yeah, you get some more longevity for sure.
Yeah. But do you want to live that long if you're that miserable?
No, no, like that's the thing. I remember when I was living in the Bay Area and I had a lot of friends in tech, obviously, and
Mm-hmm.
I would talk to people who had this, what is it, transhumanist, this belief that, we're going to upload our consciousness to the machine and just live indefinitely and I'm going to be in the cloud for eternity. There were people who I would speak to who wanted that future.
That's
And
terrifying.
yeah, I was always like, how much more dystopian can it be? Like, that's, that sounds hellish
Mm-hmm.
to be in that kind of situation. We aren't meant, the human psyche isn't meant to last for an eternity. That's not how it works.
Yeah. It seems like a night. I mean, I'm a hugger, so maybe but so the thought of just my consciousness sitting around not being hugged by anyone feels awful.
Yeah. Yeah, but they have an answer for that. The answer for that is that, we have super advanced bionics where it puts you in like a human fleshlight suit where like you have all of the sensory apparatus and everything that you need. And so you basically have a simulated body where you could still feel the hug. And I'm like, yeah, this sounds like a Black Mirror episode. This sounds
Yeah,
terrible.
that's also just it's trying to invent things that are already intuitive and natural to our world, which is always kind of the issue I've had with, I am fascinated by tech, but it's the issue I've always had with tech stuff. I went to a JPL presentation a few months ago that was just kind of this free art installation that they made that was it was just kind of tech and nature and all this stuff. But one of the things that they did was they had this kind of exhibit that was these little blades of grass that would move every time the wind happened on Mars. So it had this sensor that would make and they were like, and this is how we're going to get people in tune with nature. And I kept thinking about JPL because JPL is in the San Gabriel Mountains. It's part of where I took my naturalist course, was this hike just outside JPL. And a big thing for them is that they poison the local water table. Um, and so they've
Nice.
got a lot to account for, but they have this beautiful natural creek nearby that's got so many species of plants and animals and this beautiful stuff. And they're all sitting in their building trying to make blades of grass move from Mars in order to get in tune with nature when it's right out their front door.
Yeah.
That's not to say it was a cool exhibit, but it spoke to me so much about how we keep trying to invent stuff that already exists in this beautifully complex way that we can't possibly imitate in any way that's meaningful.
Yeah. Walt Whitman is rolling in his grave listening to that. It, it's and it goes back to the thing that we were speaking about earlier about religion and putting God the Savior outside of our reach on another planet in the heavens in some celestial body. We can think about what it's like to live on Mars because this planet, is kind of shit and sinful and it's just a temporary holding ground until we get to our real destination, which is paradise on Mars.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's that current that theme is just running through
Hmm.
so much of our common discourse.
Yeah, it really is. Yeah, it's a weird time to be around. I just got stuck behind a Waymo on
I
the
don't even know what that
street.
is. What is that?
Waymo is a self-driving car. They've been testing them out in LA, and it's supposed to be like Uber without the driver.
Okay.
And I was shocked at what a bad driver it was. Um because it's so interesting. It gave me appreciation for how complex driving is and how intuitive, how much it relies on people's intuition, because it has a bunch of sensors around the car to see where everything is. But it was just kind of driving back and forth and milling, and it seemed like it thought about turning right, but then didn't. It kept
Wow.
changing lanes in this
It was
weird.
drunk.
Yeah, it did look like a drunk driver. And it was so interesting because I just thought, oh, there is so much more going on to the process of traffic than we think. Because, there are moments where I can tell a driver's going to change lanes and move in front of me before they've signaled, and you
Mm,
just have this kind of this intuition about it. And so much of driving is that intuition and kind of being in the moment and being present. And we still get in car accidents and people mess up all the time, but we aren't ready for a self-driving car because we can only describe what we're conscious of to a robot. And
mm,
we can't describe the things we don't know we're doing. So I don't think they're ever going to necessarily catch up to us in a way that will make it as good as we are at these complex kind of tasks.
mm. Yeah, that's a great observation, and I fully agree. That's very a very good point. It's like that thing about language being, what is it, 90 or 70% nonverbal. Like
Hmm.
so much of what's happening isn't even in our awareness. There are little micro expressions and inflections in tone and all these things that are just invisible to us for the most part. So and that's the magical thing about, I guess, because we're nearing the end here, I guess we could veer into some kind of closing loop. The magical thing about existence is that there is so much of this wonder and so much of this magic and so much that is unseen, that there's so much to be grateful for and excited about. And even driving a car, like you're saying, like it's a miracle to drive a car. It's a miracle that we figured out how to assemble these elements of metal, extract them, produce them, refine them, develop a combustion engine, figure out, oh, we could use gasoline for this. The gasoline is mined from the earth, from fossils that were millions of years old. All of these crazy things are happening, and we drive around on them across great distances, requiring incredible levels of coordination, and we don't kill each other most of the time. Like you're saying, there's this kind of like transportative telepathy that you have where
Hmm.
you're on the road, and it's insane, but we're so bored, we're so unhappy,
Hmm.
we're so miserable, where everything is the same all the time, and all everything seems to be crumbling all around us when there's so much magic and wonder and intrigue and awe and beauty. And it drives me insane sometimes. It makes me angry. It makes me
Hmm.
want to feel, I don't know, feel like I'm just going to explode. So how do we, and I'm going to push this enormous question on you. how do we take all of that and all of that realization and all of that wonder and channel it into something that can sustain us and can move the needle and push us forward and like break up or dismantle those structures that just keep us separated, bored, scared, disenfranchised, disenchanted, I guess is the best word.
I think for me it's about channeling that rage into support. There's always an undercurrent of anger in how much I'm supporting people. It's about bypassing the current systems. It's about getting angry enough to say, like, I don't care that you're going to give me an awkward look. I'm going to be loving to you. Like, I don't care if you're on your phone, anxious at this open mic, not wanting to engage with anyone. I'm going to ask how your day was. It's about like channeling. I think it is about just channeling that anger into, yes, things look very bleak and people are not behaving in the ways that they that they could behave to feel much better and to dismantle these systems. So I'm just going to keep doing this work as an act of rage. I'm going to plant a plant as an act of rage. The amount that I mean, I get a lot of my rage out pulling invasive weeds, um, but yeah, it's just taking that rage and not just. A lot of people take that and just spill it out onto the internet, and that's just kind of creating a vortex of
Mm-hmm.
that just continues and just turns into a tornado. But yeah, going out and feeling the rage at the system and using that to kind of be supportive out of spite for the system is how I deal with it. I think it's healthy. I feel like I'm happier than a good chunk of my friends. So
Mm. Cool. Thank you for your solution there. I'm going to practice it for a little while and see how I feel. See if it helps me.
hmm
Mm.
yeah, I think
There
it's nice.
there is one thing that I kept wanting to touch on repeatedly throughout this conversation. So I'm going to try to just stitch it and close the loop on it before we head out.
hmm
And maybe it probably is a big can of worms, but the idea of invasive species, this is a fun one for me because I always like accepted it as, yeah, of course there are invasive species. There are things that don't belong in certain places.
hmm
But then I started hearing about like ecological colonialism and what you were talking about how indigenous peoples for millennia were working with the land and actively shaping it and working,
hmm
they had a relationship with the land.
hmm
And I've heard some people, when we talk about invasive species, they talk about it like it's a parallel to like an immigration debate. And it's so interesting to me, and I don't know a lot about it. I'm sure you know much more than me on this topic, but like, for example, I didn't know that tomatoes aren't from Italy.
Oh yeah.
Like, this is like I'm just like, what the fuck? Like the most like if I was on Who Wants to Be a Millionaire or one of these game shows, and they're like, choose the one, like which one is from Italy? Tomatoes, grapes, or it'd be tomatoes for sure. But like, how do we reconcile, or maybe reconcile is the wrong word, how do we look at invasive species? I can't even
hmm
speak anymore. Invasive species, because it seems very complex to me.
hmm it's definitely complex. There's also, if you spend time in at least California native plant groups, which is what I can speak to, a difference between invasive and non-native. Invasive largely is something actively disrupting the local ecosystem. Is it blocking things? Is it causing fires? Is it um, pushing out something native? It is a complex discussion. The one in California is an interesting one because a lot of the species that are invasive are as a result of colonialism and capitalism. In California in the 1690s, the Spanish came in and colonized, and they deliberately destroyed a lot of our native plants because they wanted the indigenous people to be reliant on the church for their food. So they deliberately took a lot of that out, burned it, destroyed it, and replaced it with cattle forage. All those cattle forage plants are invasive because they grow super fast. They replace all of that stuff. So it is interesting. I don't know that there's an intrinsic kind of definition of invasive that you know nothing's invasive everywhere. A plant that's doing okay, in Australia, that's the eucalyptus is a
Yes.
good example. It's meant to be in Australia. It's part of this ecosystem. They're in trouble over there, but we deliberately, as part of our kind of colonialist capitalist attitude, um, planted eucalyptus here, and it's a huge fire hazard here. Eucalyptus is like a kind of very chemical plant. So it has these allelopathic chemicals that when its leaves drop, not much can grow underneath it.
Mm-hmm.
So it's blocking out. It's basically just, to me, invasive plants are not evil. There's very much people always want to lump things into good or evil, and the truth is there's not an evil there. I think it's just more about, if we bring in a plant that's not native, we owe it to our local ecosystem to make sure that it stays contained and that it's not dominating our landscape. The problem comes when we only think about aesthetic, or we think about um, making profits, or, because native plants, it's actually hard to find native plants in garden stores here because they're so easy to grow and because they wouldn't make a profit. We have Waterwise is really popular right now, getting Waterwise plants, but they're all from the Mediterranean or from Australia, because we can sell them. So,
Mm,
so those kind of plants, we end up having invasive plants because of the attitudes that we have surrounding them, and not so much about the plant itself, if that makes
yeah.
sense.
Yeah, yeah, it makes sense. And thank you for the clarification and all of that. And I guess I also misspoke a little bit when I was saying invasive. I was probably meant non-native, but
Oh,
like you
sure.
you kind of touched
It's a
on both there.
nitpicky argument that people make on the internet constantly, and nobody's quite, things get redefined constantly.
But yeah, I would love to talk about this more. Like the conversations often get slippery and go in a bunch of different ways, and that's how they are. They're kind of organic. But yeah, I would maybe love to chat again, specifically about topics like these because nature is so dear to my heart
Mhm.
and yours as well. So yeah, at another time when we have more time, that would be great. But for today, I just wanted to thank you for passing through with me, Brenna, and it was a pleasure to speak to you. And I learned some stuff.
Well, thanks for having me.
Yeah, it was great. So
Yeah, this was fun.
enjoy the rest of your day, and we'll chat soon.
Yeah, I'll see ya.